Mr. Reschenthaler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Ranking Member McMorris Rogers, is there so I know when we're talking about, look at the drug pricing aspect of this bill, I know there's a ceiling. Is there a floor to this?
It's yet to be answered. It seems like that section is missing. I know that we were trying to understand what the provisions in the bill actually mean.
So, okay, let's just say there's no floor. There'd be no way to prevent the government then from pricing a drug for under what it would cost to produce the drug, and then our pharmaceutical industry would clearly lose millions, if not billions of dollars. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
So one of my big fears is this. If you just look at the pharmaceutical industry, people don't realize that we just think that we always had this development in the United States. It's actually not true. Prior to World War II, most of the pharmaceuticals were developed in Europe. Then Europe adopted a lot of policies that's in here. Then the pharmaceutical industry moved to the United States. Actually, a lot of it in eastern Pennsylvania. But so the fear is that we're now adopting the policies that cause the pharmaceutical industries to move from Europe to the United States. They could clearly move elsewhere. Am I understanding this correctly? I mean, I'm not on the committee, but is this accurate?
Yes, that is exactly my concern, the concern of many members, bipartisan on the committee, Republicans and Democrats, that have been concerned about importing a price cap, price controls that are imposed in other countries, European countries, imposing that kind of an approach to pricing prescription drugs in the United States. It limits access to those life-saving, life-changing drugs that we are on the verge of discovering incredible breakthroughs right now. You know, it's just every disease group that I meet with right now, they're so excited about what's happening in the United States of America, the research that's going to improve their lives. You think about Alzheimer's, all of the investment that we have made in Alzheimer's. And for the first time, we have a drug that is promising. That kind of research is not going to happen. You are not going to have billions of dollars being invested in researching Alzheimer's that would improve the lives of millions of people. But also, if we can delay the onset of Alzheimer's, if we could actually come up with potential cures for Alzheimer's, that is one of the best ways that we could bend the entitlement cost curve. Rather than saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're just going to, this is what we have is what we're going to be happy with. Cures for cancer, cures for rare diseases, or breakthroughs for rare diseases. We're willing to put that all aside and say what we have is what we're satisfied with.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to note that the vaccine didn't come from a European country. It didn't come from a country that does price controls. It came from, of course, the United States, and some of the technology, it came from Israel as well, but it came from two nations that believe in free market capitalism. And one concern I have if we do this, I view it as backdoor socialism, is you're going to kill any incentive to improve upon the pharmaceuticals we have. So, for example, there was a drug, it helped with cancer treatments. I think it was Valkyrie, if I can remember it correctly. But the company continued to invest in that drug, 10-year period. They finally figured out through testing they could improve the drug to treat children that had cancer as young as 1 year old. That would not have happened if we had this policy in place now, because there'd be absolutely no incentive to continue to improve upon drugs. Additionally, if you have the government able to set the price, there's no incentive to create new drugs, because a lot of people get focused on the cost of the drug, right? The cost per pill is, let's face it, it's like cents, right? But to bring a drug to market, on average, we're talking billions of dollars. I mean, not millions of dollars, billions of dollars. I think it's like $2.5 billion for your average drug. You couldn't recover it if we cap the price. There'd be no reason to ever develop new drugs. Am I correct in that understanding?
That's how I see it. That's how I view it. And instead of taking the approach that's going to cap that kind of investment, or we should be incentivizing, we should be encouraging more investment, more research here in the United States of America. Republicans and Democrats came together and passed 21st Century Cures. That was 5, 6 years ago. We are working on Cures 2.0. That is the approach that we should be taking. And you mentioned the vaccine. That was a public-private partnership, and we led the world, and we did it in record time. And a lot of people around here on Capitol Hill said it couldn't be done. They said there's no way it's going to be done in less than a year. There's no way we can get a vaccine in less than a year. And you know what? We did it in the United States of America. It's American ingenuity. It's American technology and innovation. That's what we should be celebrating, not these policies that are a damper, taxing and putting caps on innovation or caps on technology, or these government knows best, we'll tell you what you can and cannot do approaches. That isn't the way that America has led to lift people out of poverty, raise the standard of living, cure diseases, lead the world in every sector.
Can I just ask the gentleman at some point to have some time to respond?
Chairman Pallone, absolutely. I yield to you, of course.
I'm trying to be quick. Look, I just want to stress that any one of these drugs that's on this list of 100 that we're trying to capture and negotiate has the potential, in my opinion, of completely bankrupting the Medicare program, all right? The gentlewoman, the ranking member, or maybe you mentioned Alzheimer's.
Yes.
First of all, this Alzheimer's drug is something that our committee, or at least, the majority, is investigating because of our concern that it's going to cost so much that it will bankrupt the Medicare program. What's happening in the last 10, 20 years is that more and more of healthcare costs are being spent on drugs, right? And increasingly people just can't afford it. I mean, that's the problem. They just can't afford it. These companies are international. Sure, a lot of their research is done here, but some of them are Israeli, some of them are Western European based, whatever it happens to be. What has happened, because we're the only country, in Western Europe, Japan, Australia, the developed countries that doesn't have negotiated prices, is that all of the costs, or a significant number of the costs, I should say, are paid for by the American taxpayer, by the American government. And it's simply not fair. Believe me, this bill, the way it's set up, will result in negotiated prices for a lot of those, big, most expensive drugs that are costing the government so much money. But it's not going to limit research in any way, because the companies are making plenty of money that they've been putting back into research. The notion that somehow that they're not going to have enough money to do research because of this bill or H.R. 3, I just don't think that there's any factual basis for saying that. The drug companies may tell you that, but they have plenty of money available through their profits to do research, and we pay for the research. We pay for the research, the government, with the very types of things that Ms. McMorris-Rogers is talking about, 20th century cures, all these things pump all kinds of money into research. But why shouldn't we at least say, okay, look, we're not setting the price, let's negotiate the price like we do in all these other countries. And there's a lot of limitations here on when we can do that in this bill. But the idea that we shouldn't negotiate the price and that that's somehow, going to lead to less research, I just don't buy it. I mean, look, I have probably more drug companies that are based in my district than any other member of Congress. If I felt that was true, I wouldn't be here telling you this. But I just think I just think that the situation is getting completely out of hand. Let me just give you one example, and then I'll stop. My father, and I'm not trying to mention it because it's my dad, but I just have a lot of, experience with it, passed away a few years from multiple myeloma, right? Riblimum, which is one of the drugs that's the highest price and the most common used to be for when women were pregnant, they took it in the 50s, and then they found out that it was causing birth defects, so they took it off the market. But then the company found that, through their research, that it could be used for, to not cure, but postpone, the ill effects of multiple myeloma. So my father took it, and he lived probably 4 years longer than he should have. But that is costing Medicare something like $80,000 a year for each patient. I mean, we can't go on like this. And that would be one of the drugs that would probably be covered by this. We just can't afford it anymore. I mean, just being honest, it's going to these are going to bankrupt us. They really are.
Yeah, I would just say, and I respect your opinions, but I would just say just three things. One, historically, there's a reason why the industry moved from Europe to the United States, and it's because of the regulatory environment in Europe. I think that you can't argue with that. Additionally,
Gentleman yield.
I'm sorry, I know somebody's trying to talk. Is it, Brent? Yeah, Mr. Thompson, I'll yield to you.
The gentleman yield.
I've yielded to Mr. Thompson.
Thank you very much. I want to just point out, there's been the Chairman Pallone's mentioned a couple times about negotiating the price of drugs in foreign countries. I want to point out that we do it right here in the United States of America. I'm a combat wounded veteran and have access to the VA, and I buy my cholesterol drugs through the VA, and it is a fraction of the cost if I were to otherwise buy it at a pharmacy. So their ability to negotiate has really saved money for veterans, and I think that those savings should be passed on to the general public. Ms. McMorris Rogers mentioned that, I believe it was her, mentioned that she was concerned that this would limit access to life-saving drugs. I can tell you what limits access to life-saving drugs. That's the cost, the exorbitant cost of drugs. If people can't afford to buy them, they can't use them, and their life is going to be in peril. Thank you for yielding. I yield back.
Thanks. I would just have to say that the art behind you, is that a Rorschach test? What is that behind you? All right. Well, I've called out Mr. Raskin on his wallpaper, so I thought it was only fair to be consistent. With that, you know what? You had anything to add?
I want to add, I don't believe that we have to limit access to these drugs in order to save cost. It's a false choice. The VA, I met with a veteran just recently who the drug that the veteran needs is not available on the formulary, on what's been negotiated. And so this poor family in Eastern Washington is spending thousands of dollars out of pocket to get the drugs that the veteran needs, because that's what is going to save this person's life and improve their life. And that is not the future that we want. The best way to address the cost of drugs is through the generics and the biosimilars. That's the way that we're going to bring down the cost of drugs, not by limiting the access, especially in Medicare. I mean, the idea that we have to tell people that they can't have access to drugs, to life-saving, life-changing drugs. I don't believe it. We have proven that we can bring down the cost. We need to embrace the generics, the biosimilars. That's the way that we're going to bring down the cost of drugs and continue to improve people's lives and improve outcomes. Let's embrace what the future holds for us in this, not say, oh, this is the end.
But if I could just briefly, and I'll be brief. Look, we do have in this bill the $2,000 limit on your out-of-pocket costs, right? We do have that. That's a significant part of this legislation. I encourage generics. Generics are still a very good way of bringing down costs. But the drugs we're talking about here have not become generics. In other words, they have they're beyond their exclusive patent period. They've managed through various means to extend their exclusivity, if you will, for years. One of the most expensive is Humira. You see that advertised a lot on TV. That's been 21 years now, exclusive, right? They would be captured because the bill says 9 years. They were only they should theoretically have been exclusive only for 5, but they've managed to extend it to 21. So they would be captured because they're more than 9 years. But what I'm saying is that if there had been a generic alternative, then she's right. That would reduce the cost. But they've managed to prevent the generic by extending their exclusivity. And
Would the gentleman yield?
Sure.
Why the hell don't you fix that?
Well,
instead of what you're doing.
Well,
I don't understand.
That'd be great,
that,
but
that's
I need
a
the votes for
simple,
that, too.
That's a hell of a lot simpler than what you're doing here. You are putting up a straw dog. There are ways we can bring down the cost of drugs, but you refuse to do that because you, as socialists, want to control everything that goes on in this culture.
But
and
don't
it's
you
very
see- but don't you
frustrating
see the
to
very-
sit here and hear you say that. Fix what we can fix.
But don't you see that the very idea of exclusivity, particularly beyond the patent period, is in itself, maybe that's the socialist thing. I mean, in other words, you're acting as if we have a market economy and a capitalist market with competition. We don't with these drugs. The government has given them a monopoly, you see, and so that's why we have to step in. That's why we have to step in. This is not a free market. These are not
Yeah,
drugs
I
that
will-
have competition. They've been given a patent by the government, and they've extended the exclusivity for years. Now, sure, maybe it'd be nice to correct that, but try to do that and get the votes for that. That's going to be a lot more difficult.
I know that Mr. Rice and
Yes.
both Ranking Member McMorris Rogers have both indicated they want to speak, so just briefly, I'll yield to you, Mr. Rice.
The reason we give them a patent is because we want them to develop the drugs. We want to give them incentive to do it here. We want to be the center of innovation. And a lot of these countries that you talk about where other countries can negotiate, they don't have access to the drugs we do. They have access to a very half or a fourth or a very limited number of drugs because the pharmaceutical companies won't negotiate on some of the drugs or they cost too much. And when you tell them, when the government steps in with price controls like you're doing here, then what's going to happen is they're going to make decisions about what drugs they're going to develop and what they're not. And there will be drugs that will not be developed, and there will be people that suffer as a result of that. Those are just facts.
Thank you. I must just say to the committee, I am frightened. I'm frightened when I hear anyone say that we can't afford it. We can't afford to help someone save their life. Just think about it. We've all heard the stories of what hope this provides for someone, the research, the ALS. ALS was in front of our committee not too long ago. They are so hopeful as to what might be possible through the research that's underway right now. And to suggest that we can't afford it, but that is the approach that is being put in this bill. I want to put the QALYs back on the table. The quality adjusted life years. QALYs, another policy that's being imported from Europe. You know what that means? We're putting a cost on someone's life. Whether or not we think that we can afford to give them health care, whether or not we think that we can afford to give them life-saving drugs. Quality adjusted life years. So if you're in Medicare, maybe not. If you're an individual with disabilities, maybe not. Maybe we can't afford it. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not the way it has to be. This is not the way it has to be. This is not the way it should be in the United States of America, where we believe in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all. This is a frightening path that we are going down with this policy. And I urge you to reject it. We can do better. Allow us the time. This committee, Energy and Commerce, we can do better. I yield back.
Thanks, and I'd like to thank all the witnesses for testifying, and I yield back. Thanks for the generosity with the time, Mr. Chairman.
No, thank